Hello, lovely podcast listeners. I'm Carmen, and welcome to listen our 64th episode. This time we are going to be talking in English, as we have a very exciting guest from UK, and he's from a company that we at TalentHUB are fangirling a lot. You might already guess who it is.
So today we have something exciting for you. Siadhal Magos, co-founder and CEO of Metaview, the world's leading AI transcription tool for recruiting, is joining us. As Carmen mentioned, we are a huge fan of Metaview because it saves tons of time by automating interviews, note-taking, getting insightful reports, and reducing the daily data management burden. Earlier this year, Metaview raised 14 million euros, and major companies like Deel, Quora, and Sony are already using it. So today we are going to dive into Metaview's journey, explore its latest innovative products, and discuss newest trends in AI and recruiting. Welcome, Siadhal.
Hi, Siadhal, and thank you for taking the time for coming to our podcast. I know you have a very tight schedule, so we appreciate it a lot. But you have had a very interesting career, and you have been traveling from UK to US to Netherlands, and now back in UK, working in the most prominent companies in the world. And maybe you can tell me something that we couldn't find on LinkedIn about you.
Yeah, sure. And first of all, thanks so much for having me on, and thanks so much for doing this in English. I appreciate that might make things slightly tougher for you folks in the audience, but hopefully there's enough value in there that accommodating me on that front is worth it. Things that you wouldn't know about me from LinkedIn. So I guess a couple of things come to mind. I'm a bit of a strange. We sort of talked about my name already, so I'm a bit of a strange mix from that perspective. So my parents both migrated to England, one from Ireland, which is where the name Siadhal is from. And then my father was from Hungary, which is where my surname, Magos, is from. So my middle name is Laszlo, which is a very, very common Hungarian name. So half Irish, half Hungarian. I've got two daughters of my own now. So that's, I guess, not something I post about so much. So that's another thing that sort of, I think those two, along with running Metaview, keep me pretty much busy. And to be honest, I don't think I have a whole lot to my personality other than those two things at this point. So that's me.
Very cool story about your name as well, and where it comes. So now it makes sense, Siadhal. Cool. And another question is about your life principles or something that gets you going.
Yeah. So I think two things. One that's like sort of I think just I guess like supersedes trying to have impact in the world and whatnot, and more just, again, very much a principle of almost like an ethic. And then the other is more about something that I use maybe to motivate myself somewhat. The first one is, I think it's very cliche, but the golden rule around doing unto others as you want done unto you. I think that is like, it's a good principle obviously in life, but also in business as well. And I think it's never the wrong way to go, right? Because then I think it often pays back, where if you treat people well, then not that you should do it because you want the payback, but funnily enough, it turns out and shakes out that that's often works out best for you in the long run as well. And then the one that's sort of more motivational, maybe a little bit less cliche, and it's actually from a rap song that I liked when I was younger. I guess I still like it now, but I know it from my youth, is very short, but design yourself. So I really like the idea that, of course, you're in control of your own actions. You can design your own responses to certain situations. You can maybe even try and really take an active role in designing the life that you have. Frankly, you could even take a role in designing, obviously like how you look and whatnot. But the point is, really take ownership of what's going on in your life. So I really like the phrase design yourself, which is, if I feel like maybe I'm not if I'm feeling like something's happening to me in a way where I'm not reacting the best, sort of remind yourself, well, you can actually control your reaction to this thing. And that's where design yourself comes in useful for me.
That's a very insightful thought. Design your life. Very cool. Catherine, you can take over from here.
Let's go into more depth about the Metaview and everything around that. So You have a background in Uber, Tesco. How did you end up building a recruitment tool?
So two sort of experiences that resulted in us building in recruiting. It wasn't like by design. As you mentioned, I was not a recruiter before starting Metaview, and I've been working on Metaview for 6 years now. So obviously I feel like I know the industry very well, but before starting it, it wasn't an industry I knew well at all. But at Uber, I was at Uber 2016, 2017. It was, by that point, thousands of employees, but it was still growing incredibly fast. And so anyone at my level within the company, you're really spending, 20, 30% of your time on hiring or like very hiring related initiatives. And so that was really, actually, it was at Uber, which is what I was doing just before starting Metaview. That was my first exposure to hiring just being a big part of my professional life. So, and I did sort of reflect at the time that, much as these weren't unique experiences that I was having, because there's obviously hundreds of other people there involved in hiring, it's like almost relatively unique, right? There's not that many people who get the experience of seeing what hiring in hyperscale looks like, and then at the same time, like have an idea of how to solve it. So that was just this initial observation or initial exposure to doing a lot of hiring and feeling that especially the interview, the sort of the human to human interactions were really important parts of hiring, but were really unreliable and lossy and messy. So there was that first observation. And then the second thing was started to sort of just experiment on some solutions with Shahriar, who's my co-founder, and started to build conviction that the world was changing such that we could now capture that data. One change was we're having more and more of these hiring conversations into cameras and microphones, right? Before, 20 years ago, of course, it would never happen. You would never have these conversations within arm's length of a camera and a microphone. Now, in 99% of cases, you do. And then the second thing was that at the time, this is before LLMs, or before LLMs were sort of publicly available and super useful, we thought speech to text was just about getting good enough that you could reliably make sense of the conversation using software. So we thought those two combinations, the fact that we had gotten really passionate about some of the things that we felt as hiring managers could be fixed in hiring, along with these societal and technological shifts, mean that you could actually start to harness what we thought was the most important data within hiring, which is what do you actually know about the person you're thinking of hiring?
Thank you for sharing the experience and how did you end up in here. But how has been the evolution of Metaview? So You started with the transcription tool, you're offering now a full set of tools. So what was the vision behind everything?
So actually, the vision hasn't changed really. The execution has changed substantially because technologies have changed. But the vision was always that if you can, we use the phrase internally, harness the data. So harness to us means not only you capturing the data, but you're actually using it for some impact, right? So we figured if you could harness the data within these conversations, then there are actually a lot of applications you can build on top of that. And so we've tried various applications over the years, some things that are more focused on coaching interviewers, some things that are more focused on helping leadership understand the consistency of their interview process. Some things focus on training up new interviewers, so before they've become an interviewer. So there are lots of different applications, even before we had a lot of our success, which has been in the last 2 years. But obviously the application that really, I think when you say you sort of are fangirling over Metaview, probably the main application you're thinking of is, the AI now actually structures my notes for me during the call. That's the thing that really was a massive unlock. And we realized, actually, if you can solve the needs of the people who are doing the hiring, the recruiters, the hiring managers, that's actually where you get almost like most impact, most bang for your buck. So I think that was one thing that did shift in the last 2 years, is we started to focus a lot more on how can we enable recruiters and hiring managers. They want to do great hiring. They want to be surrounded by great colleagues. Recruiters want the hiring manager they're working with to feel like the candidates that are being put in front of them are like fit for the role. They're massively motivated by those things. So if we can help people with that, that's actually the highest impact way to make a difference. But it doesn't change the vision. The vision is still the same. There's still going to be other applications, and you're starting to see them, I'm sure, now. There's still going to be other applications on top of this data. So one sort of common thing that people now look at is, maybe once they start using Metaview, they're initially doing it because, hey, I don't want my recruiting team or my hiring managers to have to worry about notes anymore. But actually, now that we've got this data, we can do some really interesting things. Like I can check compensation expectations of candidates in different locations and see how they compare. And so I'm not just using third-party data. I'm using like my primary data as a company around where compensation expectations are falling. It's much more dynamic and live. If you've got a new hire you're trying to make, you can actually sort of extract valuable data from your database of previous conversations about someone that might be a good fit. So there are all these other things that aren't just the note taking in the first instance, but actually how you leverage that data for other business problems or recruiting related business problems that people are also increasingly using the product for, and that we're going to build more and more products around as well.
That's very interesting. I just wanted to ask, have you also got some good insights from the companies that are using Metaview and gotten some new ideas how to help them, how to help better make hiring decisions, help them to grow? Anything else that was maybe surprising for you as well, that you even didn't think in the first place that, our tool can help also to solve this problem?
Yeah, I mean, that sort of stuff happens all the time. And just I realized I missed something out of when you asked previously about how has the vision shifted. I didn't really sort of articulate actually what the vision is. So the vision for us is we're all about radically increasing hiring leverage. So essentially, we want to make every sort of ounce of effort you put into hiring to be even more effective, as effective as it could possibly be. And we sort of see that around two dimensions. One is, if we can how can we make recruiting drastically more efficient by leveraging AI? So having the AI do things that the people involved, like recruiters and HMs, don't really need to be doing. And then the second is, how can we make hiring far more precise? So if we can actually get to the end of a process and you make more precise decisions on a candidate. Sorry, just to finish off that answer. So your question then was about sort of surprising things that we've learned. We stay very close to customers, both in terms of like literal conversations with folks. I try and be very present on like LinkedIn, for example, and like that often encourages a lot of people to communicate with me, and I learn a bunch through that. But also actually in how our product is instrumented. So there's lots of sort of pockets within Metaview where you can give feedback on how Metaview is done for you and what you'd like it to do differently in these things. So we have like a few ways of staying really close. So I don't often find we're incredibly surprised, as I would say. But I'd say one thing that recently has been a focus based on customer feedback, which was, frankly, I thought was a lower priority than I think it turns out it really is almost people's focus on JD, job description correctness. So my take on JDs actually was, and this is from my experience as a hiring manager, I just needed to write a JD so I could get on with the role. It wasn't like I wasn't actually so focused on how correct this JD is. And I think the thing I was missing, of course, was a lot of the time when a recruiter is, maybe they're struggling with a rec. One of the things they go back and refer to themselves is the JD. Like, hey, what am I missing here? Like, reread that JD. So it's actually much more important in their mind than it is maybe in the hiring manager. So creating more alignment around that has been a strangely impactful insight. And we've launched a few things already, but there's more to come on that front soon as well. So that's been one surprising thing. But I would say by far the biggest surprise for me has been the amount of initiative, basically, that especially recruiters take to solve their own problems. So when we initially launched our note taker, we had a big debate internally. Should we do this as like you have to come and talk to our team and then buy the product through a sales process? Or can we make it so that recruiters can just walk up to the website, start to use the product and, self-serve essentially? And I was very much in the camp of, no, I think this is mainly going to be like a sales process because they're going to have a lot of questions around, how does it work? Does it integrate with this? Does it integrate with that? All these sorts of things. And so we should force them through a conversation. But actually, it turned out that recruiters were more than happy to sort of scratch their own itch and solve their own problem and just like figure this stuff out for themselves. And obviously, we try and make it as easy as possible to do that stuff. But I was surprised by, just the the culture of experimentation that exists within a lot of recruiting firms and recruiting teams within tech companies as well.
That is super cool. Thank you for sharing. And I just wanted to comment or share the appreciation, like how closely you are in contact with your customers. And I just remember when we started using Metaview and it didn't support the Estonian language at first. And then I just commented in LinkedIn, I think. And then you and somebody else reached out to via Gmail. And then in a couple of weeks later, you enabled the Estonian language as well. And it's just super awesome how quickly you react and how closely you communicate with the users. So thank you for that.
No worries. So it's it's part of our culture for sure, but also it really benefits us, right? If we can make the product better for you folks, then of course the product is also better for everyone else. So it's not just a favor, right? It helps us build the best product. So.
Thanks.
Yeah, you just launched the job description AI creation tool. What else is in your pipeline that you're building or want to come out soon? Maybe you want to reveal something, maybe the area, something that's exciting to our listeners to hear.
Yeah, happy to talk a little about. There are some things that are a little bit more, I would say almost like a little bit more experimental and therefore probably not maybe we'll do a little bit more work on them before we reveal what they are. But I think there are some things that we know are really sensible to do and really can be really powerful that we can talk about. One is around actually the job description thing that you mentioned, where you'll see more of that sort of capability to, connect the data from conversations to the JD and therefore sort of like get a better feel for, essentially generate better and better job descriptions, but also run better and better interviews as a result. Another is, one of the most powerful things about Metaview is you can give the AI instructions about how you want your notes. So essentially the way that it often works is you'll start using Metaview as a recruiter, you'll have it on your first couple of calls and you'll think, wow, this is really good because it's already writing my notes in a way that's really sort of empathetic to how a recruiter wants their notes. But actually there's almost like an 80-20 rule here, where if you can actually give a few more tweaks to how the AI outputs the notes, you can get exactly what you want every single time and really never even have to edit and adapt the notes that the AI does ever again. And so we have those two capabilities. We have the default notes that people use when they first try out the product, but then we also have this feature that enables you to create a set of instructions for the AI so it can output the notes in a different format that suits you better. And a lot of people really love this capability because it saves, again, because I mentioned it saves them so much time. But it's a little bit, it's a bit, I wouldn't call it a steep learning curve necessarily, but you have to like make the whole set of instructions before you can get the output. So we're going to play with some things where you can really have much more of a collaborative exchange with our AI in order to get the notes exactly how you want, and then let the AI know, and now I'm really happy with these. Please do it like this every single time, until I tell you differently. So really trying to make it much more of a collaborative way that you engage with the AI in order to get the notes exactly how you want them and where you want them and shared with whoever you want them shared with as well.
That's a very important addition because the hiring managers and especially for us when we are working as agency, we have so many different partners ourselves as well, and everybody expects the notes to be different, and then we can customize them as well according to their needs and their expectations. That's very cool. But I'm coming back to the job description part for a second. You mentioned that it's important to make it on point and more personalized, but maybe you can tell us why is it so important, or what the difference that does it makes if your job description is not just a description?
Yeah. Well, one is the initial alignment. So I think a lot of the time, what you folks will obviously know this. I'm sure many of the listeners will as well. You have your intake call with the hiring manager to get a feel for, in their words, what are they looking for, but also get some like very tangible information about the candidate. And the way, if you think about a pre-Metaview or pre-AI world, you'd go from that meeting into a job description, which is the almost like the manifestation of that conversation. But there's obviously a whole lot of work that either the recruiter or the hiring manager would do in between, really. And a lot of the time you'd end up with a JD that isn't truly reflective. So getting to a point where the JD is really reflective of what you're looking for in the role has a ton of downstream impact, both for, as I mentioned, the recruiter when they're sort of their ongoing calibration. It enables them to run better screens, essentially, and sort of really identify which parts of this am I going to screen for. But also enables the recruiter to hold a hiring. If you are truly treating the job description as something that's a description of the job, then you, as a recruiter, can hold the hiring manager to a higher accountability around their assessment as well. Like, hey, these were the things that we agreed. We know that because we canonized it in this JD, which we both agreed on and collaborated to build. But you're not actually assessing those things. So how can I do my job? So creating those, maybe conflict, like positive conflicts, is actually a good thing off the back of a strong JD that people truly buy into. Because what we're really trying to move away from is a world where, I was a bad example of this, right? Where JD for me was like let's get it up there so that we can get some candidates through. And I was making it the recruiter's problem, right? Find me a bunch of candidates and then figure out what I'm looking for, because I couldn't be bothered to sort of do the JD properly. So that's really the thing that we really like about that. But at the same time, we're very we're also empathetic to hiring managers. We know that these aren't, obviously because we've been them ourselves, these aren't bad people who just don't care about these recruiters. They just have other things that they're doing, and they're not expert enough at recruiting to know the importance of these things. So if we can sort of if we can be the glue in between, such that it's still not asking the hiring manager to dedicate a lot of time to this definition, but actually we're sucking out this definition from them almost passively as they're going about their conversations, and then like presenting them with something, then you can create much better calibration and alignment between recruiter and hiring manager. And what we believe is actually, when you think about efficiency and precision of hiring, which are the two words that we care about most, the calibration, the alignment between the recruiter and the hiring manager is probably the biggest thing that can achieve that. Just to call out the really obvious, if they're not calibrated, you lose on efficiency because the recruiter puts through candidates to the hiring manager that the hiring manager thinks are a waste of time. Those candidates that are a waste of time take up slots on the hiring manager's calendar, which means they can't speak to the really good one who's like waiting in the wings. At some point, maybe the hiring manager starts to think, you know what, there's so much information I need to give to this recruiter to get them calibrated. I can't even be bothered. I'm just going to let them keep on throwing people at me until we eventually get, and they just grind it out as opposed to try and solve it in a systematic way. And so that's the sort of style of hiring we want to try and put an end to, where it's much more precise and collaborative and, really thinking about running the pipeline in an efficient way.
That's super exciting. And I started to think that would it be possible to develop it further, is that, for example, if you're working as an agency, we have different companies, so it would understand the style of the company or the culture of the company, and then create the job description that you can actually publish that would reflect the company's tone of voice for and to kind of get more relevant candidates through that as well then.
Yeah, so right now the way it works is, and I'll talk right now, meaning that we have some of the things in the works, but some of it's already live, some of it is going to be live soon. Right now the way it works is you can point the AI, when you're asking to create a job description, you can point Metaview at a few things. You can point it at the intake conversation that was had. You can also point it at some previous interviews where a lot of the time the hiring manager will reveal things about the role, that are really actually relevant to the job description as well. But you can also point it at other JDs. You can say, well, here's a JD for another role in our company, which does a really great job summarizing our cultural values. And here's a JD from another company that I really admire that's hiring a similar role. Like maybe I'm going to put in like Notion's JD for their sort of sales reps, or I might give it a few examples and I say I want to sort of create this style, but the values that influence us are from this one. So you can essentially give it, just like when you work with a human being, you say, hey, you sort of have this very you almost have this map that you sort of like communicate to someone of these are the different influences that I want to influence the JD in different ways. You can do the same thing, just point the AI at these different artifacts, and then it will produce the JD based on that. And then, of course, it'll probably get it slightly wrong first time around, and you tell it, actually, I want to know a bit more like this, and you get there much quicker.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that the alignment between the recruiter and hiring manager is like most of the time the blocker.
Yeah.
But in Metaview, you collect a lot of sensible information from the candidates, like we collect through you. how have you protected? I assume that you're GDPR compliant, so the data is protected. Just, I mean, all the listeners, all the hiring people, they definitely want to know it's a thing. So how the data is protected and
Yeah, so I think there's one is protected, which is obviously what you sort of asked about, but then the other side of it is how are the people involved in the conversation, like what rights do they have to access the data? Because you protecting it is one thing, but at the end of the day, if you're an interviewer or a candidate, you also have certain rights. It's not just the company's data; it's your data too. So from a protection perspective, listen, there's nothing unique here. There are lots of certifications that companies like ours get in order to prove how secure essentially the data that we capture is, and we have these enterprise level certifications. This essentially means that we're getting constantly audited in both literally how our product is built, but also the work processes we have as a company, like internally who has access to what, for example. So those things are just constantly audited, which is what enables us. I mean, we do it because it's the right thing to do, of course, and we even had this before we got the certification. But what a lot of our larger customers will ask us is, do you have a SOC 2 certification, which is just a very sort of common security certification. So that's one way, is just like best practices around security. There's nothing unique about Metaview in that regard. I'd say the only thing that is slightly new that people sometimes have questions about is more, but are you using this data to train AI, and how? And the answer to that is no, we're not. So we use our sort of AI partners are companies like OpenAI and Anthropic. And when you're a business customer of theirs, they don't use any of that data for training their models. So if you go and use ChatGPT just via your browser and you input some information, they will use that to improve their models over time. That's one of the ways that they get better. But companies like ours, if you're using Metaview, that's not happening. It's sort of ring fenced, and it's not used for those training purposes at all. So that's another sort of part of the security that people might have questions about. It's never a blocker. It's just a good, curious question to have that we can obviously give you the answer to. So those are the security aspects. Then from a data privacy perspective, Metaview is fully GDPR and CCPA, which is the sort of the Californian version, compliant. Really what it comes down to is there's a few ways in that the product, the rights that you really need to respect of a candidate and an interviewer are, they have the right to be aware that their data is being captured in this way, and they have the right to access and the right to delete the data or have the data deleted. So we enable and respect all of those rights on behalf of our customers. And once you do that, again, you're golden from a privacy perspective.
That's very good. I know that a lot of candidates are asking it as well when they're coming to the calls, that how our data is protected and so on. So thanks for explaining. But now when we are zooming out from Metaview for a bit, since you have been working in large companies, and with Metaview you are operating in a global scale as well. And when we're thinking about recruitment and hiring in general, do you have any pet peeves in that topic?
About hiring into our own team?
No, like maybe, yes, you can answer it in that sense. And maybe another perspective would be in general, that you see that's like a common mistake or something that's very...
Yeah. I would say the biggest pet peeve, I think, it's more than a pet peeve, but so I'll give some other smaller ones in a second. But I do think the investment in the alignment with recruiters is probably, as a HM between the two, is probably the key. I think sometimes you have quite a big authority gap between recruiters and the HM they might be working with. Sometimes not. Sometimes they're both very senior and it sort of can work out really well. But sometimes you have really senior hiring managers working with maybe more junior recruiters, and there's a big authority gap. And I think, it's probably fair to expect the hiring manager to do the work much as it is the recruiter's job. If there's this authority gap, sometimes you need to sort of do the work to ensure that alignment. So I'd say just from like a process perspective, that's one. And the way we see that in our product, just to be clear, is a lot of the time we'll start with companies just in their recruiting team. The recruiters get a lot of value out of it, obviously, but they start to realize there'll be a lot more value if also everyone else uses it, i.e. the hiring managers and the hiring team, the interviewers, the approvers, because not only will it save them time, it would also give them more information. So I, as a recruiter, if I was really excited about this candidate and then I put them through to the hiring manager and the hiring manager didn't like them, I sort of want to know why. And I can ask them why and I'll get a bit of information, but sometimes it's just better if I can go and check it out and see what happened. And so one of the ways that we see this like slight distrust between recruiters and hiring managers is the recruiter's ability to make the hiring manager understand that this is going to help them too. And instead the hiring manager is sort of can be a little bit, if they're not fully engaged and in the process, they can be a little bit dismissive about the value of something like this. So it's a bit of a pet peeve from that perspective, because I think if everyone sort of took a moment to understand that this would be in everyone's interest to A, save time by having the AI capture this data, but B, it will enable recruiters to do a better job, then it almost just increases the extent to which Metaview is a no-brainer for people. But yeah, so that's one I would say is sometimes when you don't have those great working relations between recruiters and hiring managers. Other pet peeves, I think I'm a little bit less... I'm quite big on rubrics for, and we see this with some of our customers as well. I'm quite big on rubrics for understanding if someone's a good fit for a role that are relatively high level. I don't necessarily think they should be like really granular, but like high level rubrics for sure. But I'm less keen. I'm less convinced that truly like totally structured interviewing actually is the best way to understand that someone's fit against that rubric. So one of the things that I sometimes find is a bit of almost a pet peeve is people who think that great interview is like literally word for word doing the same interview every time, as opposed to having a conversation that is focused on getting the information you need from the candidate that's going to help you understand their fit against the rubric, which maybe within, say I'm interviewing you, Carmen, maybe in my first question, I realize, wow, she's incredibly strong on this front. I'm going to leave that there, but I have this big flag on this area. I'm actually going to spend a lot of time digging much deeper into this thing so that I can fill in the rubric or fill in my scorecard really effectively. And it's not because I had the structured interview plan. It's because I understood what I was looking for. So I think moving the industry, let's say, away from this, I think structured interviewing was a way to avoid terrible interviewing. And I think maybe now what we need to do is move to a world where we want to enable great interviewing. And if you're going to enable great interviewing, it's going to be more because you really understand what you're looking for and you have a real-time sense of, have I understood this from this person yet? And if not, I'm going to keep on asking different questions. I don't think it's fair to expect everyone to get expert level, but I think structured interviewing was setting a bit of a low ceiling on people's ability to do great recruiting, which I do think things like Metaview will help undo a little bit, because we'll be able to extract all the information, so you don't have to be super sort of rigid about the questions you ask and the exact sort of kernel of like information you extract off the back of it.
That is so good, and I just want to highlight the fact that you just explained about the rubric concept, and that you don't need the structured interview plan, but you just need to know what you're looking for and you need to get the answer. That's so good. And
having some go-to questions makes sense, to be clear. You don't want to like create new questions from first principles every single time. It's just having the really systematic and like asking your interviewers to go up and just essentially read from a script. It also sort of reduces their level of buy-in to the role that they're playing in deciding who joins the team as well. So I think it's more like the level of structure that I think maybe was a bit overdone. Yeah,
that's true. Because the organic conversation is very important to get to understand how the person is thinking and just to kind of rate the conversation flow as well. But to talk about a little bit in more of an opportunistic side, then what is the next hot topic or actually the current hot topic in AI and recruitment? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
I think that we're moving to... I think it's more of the same topic, to be honest. But maybe just to bring it so I think the way that I think about the way that AI is already but will continue to impact us is really along 3 dimensions. One is automation. So there's just some things that obviously now you can automate, and I would say some things that it's not obvious, but actually you can automate as well. So I think there's like the bucket of things you can automate. We're still just scratching the surface of that. And that will obviously change the day-to-day role of a recruiter, but also a hiring manager, because some of the tasks will be like less important because AI can do them. Then the second thing that AI is really good for is detection. So in this world where, like, let's imagine, Carmen, let's imagine you were a recruiter at a large tech company. If it was feasible for you to be in every interview at the same time and suck and harvest and hold all this information, you'd probably be able to sort of detect lots of different issues in the company. That's not possible for you to do. But actually now with AI, you do have this. It's sometimes helpful to think of AI almost as a person on your team. Is that this person is super powered and able to join every single interview all the time, or every single hiring conversation, or be part of whatever it might be all the time. And they're going to detect, well, this is happening differently over here than it is over here. Like, what do you want to do about it? So detection, I think, is another big bucket that AI is going to help recruiters with. And then the third is, you could say, decisions, maybe recommendations. I think that last bucket is the one that people get most worried about. I think most folks are spending most of their time in the automation and detection world, but I do think we're going to start to figure out as an industry and frankly as a society to what extent does it benefit us to let AI have an input in our decisions as well. You're already seeing that at the very top of the funnel in the recruiting context, right? You're seeing a lot of stack ranking of applications powered by AI. You can think of, for some reason, people don't think of that as a decision, but it really is, right? Because of course that's influencing your decision as a recruiter about which of these candidates, because if you look at the candidate who's at the bottom of that pile, frankly, is less likely to be interviewed, even just because you won't get to the bottom of the list. So I think it's already affecting decisions, whether we like to admit it or not. But I think what we'll have a reckoning of over the next, it's happening now, and we've got to figure it out over the next few years, is what's the right way to let AI influence our decisions, because there is value there. It's not realistic to think we're going to have access to super intelligence, something that is far more intelligent than obviously all three of us on this call put together. We're obviously going to use that to inform our decisions. So I think that's an interesting trend. And I think it plays really nicely alongside detection, obviously, because the whole point of detection is you're picking up data that you otherwise would have missed. If it's then up to companies like ours to work out, well, which points of this data do we think are most interesting to you that might help you make a better decision? And so I think you'll see more of that.
Very cool. And I'm just wondering, since you are operating in a global scale, is everything evolving globally the same way, or some trends are evolving differently in different countries, or who's ahead?
Really good question. Yeah, we haven't noticed any major trends yet. There are some countries basically where I'll just make it very clear. We have a good number of customers in places like Germany and France. They do have more red tape around how they go about the level of due diligence they do over an AI tool before they'll adopt it is higher. So that obviously slows things down for them. And us when we're obviously talking with them, but it's more of a thing for them because it's their country that's going to have this slower adoption of these tools. Now, obviously, they might be proven that's the right way to do things, and obviously, as I say, we have a lot of customers there, so it always lands in the right conclusion. It's just it slows things down a little bit. But I would say that's more at the it's more at the initial adoption level. I haven't noticed it from a behavioral, hey, the people over here sort of tend to be more interested in this stuff or anything like that just yet.
That's very exciting. Thanks for sharing.
Yes, now back to you and your team, and we have been talking about hiring so much. So what are the 3 key elements for you to make sure you're hiring a high-performing team?
Yeah. So the number one by far, this is a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, the by far the best way, easiest is not the right word. Let me take that back. The best way to hire great people who are a great fit for your company is for them to be meeting what they perceive to be great future colleagues during the interview process. So you sort of have this is what I mean, it's like a little bit of a chicken and egg situation where, we found it actually, really hard to build out our first few team members because we were so aware that actually when you start, even when you're hiring person number 10, 11, 12, they're going to meet maybe half of the company during the interview process, and they need to come away from that. If they're going to take a bet on their career to join our company, a big part of that bet is going to be based on, well, am I going to be surrounded by great people? Even if Metaview fails, am I going to have met people who are going to be really useful for me in my future career? And if there are great people there, Metaview has more chance of being successful as well. So it's just so important to get those, for the people that people meet during the interview process, to be really high quality if you want to bring in really high quality people. And the great thing about that is once you do break the back of that, of course, it then gets easier. We might be competing with other great companies for a certain candidate, but if they actually feel like, well, I want to work with those people, those human beings that I met during the interview process, I want to work with those ones, then of course you got an advantage. So I'd say that is number one. So I think it's the talent density thing. Is people talk about the value of talent density in all sorts of ways. So I think that's like a given. That's a given. What I'm talking about it is in specifically that it makes it easier to then get more people that match the talent bar you need. So I think that's the number one by far. I think other than that, I mean, I mentioned we have not set interview structures, but we have, like, I would say emerging, almost like general expectations of what everyone, like, we have good level of clarity around like what makes someone a good Metaview person, basically. And I think we probably haven't done an amazing job really sort of explicitly propagating that understanding to the whole team. But I do think it inherently comes through in like when we give our feedback on candidates and these sorts of things. We are pretty, we have a lot of the team involved in interviewing, but we are still at the stage, of course, where myself and my co-founder are involved. We will see every candidate at this point at least twice personally as founders before we would hire them. So this sort of idea that you centralize decision-making authority in your most trusted hirers, which for us right now are the founders, is also something that's pretty important to me. So I think that's like again, sometimes a frustrating thing. You hear about these stories where people are, companies like 500 or 1,000 person company, and still the founders are interviewing or at least speaking to every candidate. Obviously, it's a massive bottleneck, but like we should understand there's some upside to that as well. Well, that at least there could be an upside to that as well. So I think that's probably another. I'd really say those are the two. I'd actually throw a third out there. Finding high quality external elastic resources. So basically agencies or more importantly, external recruiters who you can work really well with is also vitally important. I think sometimes, especially in startup world, much as I do spend a lot of time sourcing and that sort of thing, I think there's almost like a little bit of, for some reason, there's this sense that agencies are expensive. But actually, if you compare it to when we weren't working with agencies so much, if you compare that to the amount of time that I was spending, how expensive that is, not because I'm paid a lot of money, to be clear, but more because my time should be really valuable for Metaview. I should be able to like help Metaview get further along if I'm like by operating in the company. But I basically think actually finding great agencies to work with is actually pretty good value for money, and has been a big part of us building out our team. So those are my two.
Very cool. I was just very curious to hear, maybe you can bring out some specific details. Why is it vital to use an agency, or what kind of value has it brought to you to use an agency? And then what makes a good agency?
Yeah. So for us, specialization. So I have found that when I've worked with an agency that either knows a market particularly well or a job role particularly well, you get to calibration quicker. I think there's a risk there. If you're working with a poor recruiter, then they're going to throw poor candidates at you and convince you that that's the market, and then it's going to affect. You might end up hiring someone that's not that good. But I think if you do your diligence on the recruiter and they're truly an expert in their market, and I might come in and say, listen, we're looking to hire AEs. Salespeople. I want them to have worked at great productivity companies like I mentioned earlier, like Notion or Monday.com or Figma or something like this. I don't really mean they have to literally have come from those companies. I'm just using that, of course, as an indication. But someone's ability to extrapolate that to other companies that might be less sort of front of mind for me, but actually they know there's high quality AEs there. that's been really helpful. Whereas actually I've had other cases where I've worked with someone and they've literally just taken what I've said and found some people, and for whatever reason they're not right, because obviously these are market leaders. They're not used to selling an upstart product, and by this point those companies are really well known, so they have a much easier time selling those products, so they're not actually a good fit. So I think it's just the level of expertise, but be it based on location or like on job role, that I found useful. And then the other sort of way to look at it is like versus the alternative. The alternative is for us to build an in-house team, which of course we will at some point. But especially for us, that's quite a high stakes hire, right? When we hire our first recruiter, that's going to be one of our most important hires that we make, because we're a recruitment technology company, and they're going to have a big influence, probably even on our product roadmap. Like, that's a really big hire. So even just from a very tactical, listen, are we going to spend the next 6 months hiring for the person who will then do the recruiting, or are we going to like focus on the product engineers and the salespeople that we need, and we'll use both our own elbow grease as founders of the company, but also using external resources? I think it's just nets out as like the right balance for us.
Cool. How big is Metaview today?
We're 22 people in the core team. Then there's a few sort of additional like sort of advisors and these sorts of things, but that's the core team building the company.
Okay, very cool.
And thank you for sharing the key elements. I can resonate all of them so much. I think the founder interviews for the candidate perspective are super good. Even like if there's 1,000 employees already in the company, and it can be a blocker for scaling, but for the candidate perspective, it's very useful, and they all want to meet with the people who are behind the vision and the company and the idea. Anyhow, today now we are getting end of the podcast, and we have 3 last questions for you. These are the quick ones. We expect just very short answers, your ideas, both those things. It's very like a traditional thing that we are doing in our podcast. So, are you ready?
Ready.
What would be one thing you would change in the field you work?
I would have more people experimenting with AI, and there's a few too many people who are making it few too many people looking for reasons not to, and I think that's a really bad decision for them. And obviously, it's good for us if they don't do that, but I think it's really bad for them. So that's what I'll change.
Great. Who is the person who inspires you the most?
I would say probably my co-founder, Shahriar.
Great answer. Please give me or all of our listeners one reading or listening recommendation.
Listening recommendation, I would say that I actually I used to really like it, then I went off it, but actually I think the sort of the 20 VC group of podcasts, the 20 VC, 20 growth, 20, so they're really good, and I think he's he runs great interviews, he gets great guests and runs great interviews, gets into the meat of things, so I feel like I learn from those. Reading, the thing that I've read recently that has probably affected me most is the one that's coming to mind is there's a book called Soft War. I don't know if it's going to be super relevant to everyone, but essentially it's Larry Ellison, who is the founder of Oracle. It's like a biography of him. But what's really interesting about it is, so it's not an autobiography. He didn't write it himself. There was a journalist who followed him around, wrote the book about him. But within the sort of book, Larry Ellison, who it's about, insisted on having the right of reply. So anywhere that in the book where he saw something that he didn't agree with, he would also write what his perception of it. So I thought it was like really interesting. But anyway, the main takeaway from it is just, it's a company that we all sort of, whether we know it or not, we rely on that company a ton. It's a huge behemoth. It's been relevant for decades now. And he's just a really interesting character. I don't take inspiration from this, I wouldn't say, but he's very competitor focused. He is like driven by competition almost exclusively, which I think is the reason I liked it, is because a lot of other folks try and act like you should totally not think about competition at all. Now, I think the reality is everyone has to choose where they are on the spectrum, but it's interesting that he's so strongly competitor oriented, which is a bit of it's a bit of a narrative violation for how most other folks in like tech companies like to think, which is no, just focus on customer, just focus on this. Yes, you do need to do that, but I do think sort of taking account and maybe getting motivation from competition is also a good thing.
Great answers. Thank you for sharing. And I should have warned you that these are quite difficult questions in the end. So, yeah. But thank you for today's podcast. We are so happy that you came here, introduced Metaview, shared so many valuable insights, and also shared how Metaview is useful for the recruiters, hiring managers, everyone who is involved in recruitment process, and also sharing your perspectives for the future, what is happening in the world, so in AI and recruitment field. So thank you. It was very, very insightful, and we wish you all the best in the world.
Thank you so much. Really, really happy to have done it, and thank you for accommodating me in various ways. And pumped to have you folks as customers as well. So thank you for that.